Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a massive question. How did a huge, incredibly diverse subcontinent actually unite against one of the most powerful empires in history? We're going to explore the really complex, honestly fascinating birth of Indian nationalism. We'll look at how completely different groups of people, folks dealing with totally different daily struggles, somehow found themselves marching under the exact same banner of freedom, even if, their actual visions of that freedom were radically different. So how does a deeply divided nation find a shared identity? It's a provocative question, right? I mean, in a land with so many different languages, classes, and regional identities, how do you forge a single, unified nation? Well, the glue that tied a lot of these groups together was, surprisingly, the shared oppression they were all feeling under colonialism. They literally discovered their unity through the process of struggling against the British. But, as we're going to see, just because you experience oppression together doesn't necessarily mean you agree on exactly how to fight it. Part 1. The Catalyst of Crisis. The Impact of World War I. To really understand how this massive movement caught fire in the 1920s, we've got to look first at the severe toll of the First World War. The extreme hardship for everyday people was just staggering. To finance these huge defense expenditures, the colonial government brought in income taxes and hiked up custom duties. Just imagine trying to feed your family when prices literally double in the span of 5 years, between 1913 and 1918. Then, you add to that the deep anger in rural areas over forced recruitment into the British Army, and top it off with the devastating blow of widespread crop failures causing acute food shortages. It was a perfect storm. And the scale of the suffering was horrific. According to the 1921 census, 12 to 13 million people perished. I mean, let that number really sink in for a second. 12 to 13 million. Millions dying not on the battlefields of Europe, but right at home in India as a direct result of famines and an influenza epidemic that were heavily exacerbated by these wartime conditions. Part 2. The Power of Satyagraha, a novel method of mass agitation. So, people obviously hoped their hardships would end once the war was over. But they didn't. Instead, a new leader stepped onto the scene. Long before he actually returned to India in 1915, Mahatma Gandhi had already been testing out a radically different approach to resistance. Back in 1913, he successfully led a mass agitation of workers marching from Newcastle to Transvaal to protest racist laws in South Africa. So he wasn't just sitting around theorizing. The man had immense, practical, boots-on-the-ground experience in mobilizing people. The crucial turning point here is that Gandhi introduced this concept of satyagraha. He basically proposed that if the cause was true, and if you were truly struggling against injustice, then physical force was entirely unnecessary to fight the oppressor. A satyagrahi could actually win the battle, not by seeking revenge, but by appealing directly to the conscience of the oppressor. It was all about persuading people to see the truth, rather than forcing them into submission through violence. Now, it is really easy to mistake nonviolence for just doing nothing. But Gandhi famously clarified his concept, arguing that satyagraha is pure soul force and supreme nonviolence. In his own words, it is not passive resistance. It calls for intense activity and immense inner strength. He firmly believed this specific dharma of nonviolence could be the key to ultimately uniting all Indians. Part 3. Repression and mass outrage. The breaking point. Emboldened by some early successes in local disputes, Gandhi called for a nationwide strike. But the real trigger for massive, widespread outrage was the Rowlatt Act of 1919. This law was rushed through despite totally united Indian opposition, and it gave the government enormous powers to basically crush political activities. They could now lock up political prisoners without a trial for up to 2 years. It literally stripped away basic civil liberties overnight. In response to this, Gandhi organized rallies, railway workers went on strike, and shops completely shut down. The British administration fought back, and they fought back brutally. After martial law was imposed in Amritsar, General Dyer took command and actively sought to humiliate and terrorize the local population. He went as far as literally forcing everyday citizens to crawl on their bellies through the streets. And this unbearable repression culminated in the absolute horrors of Jallianwala Bagh. On April 13th, a large crowd had gathered in an enclosed ground. Now, some were there to protest, sure, but a lot of them were just villagers attending the annual Baisakhi fair, totally unaware that martial law had even been declared. General Dyer blocked the only exit points and ordered his troops to just open fire on the crowd, without any warning. Hundreds of people were killed. Dyer actually stated later that his goal was to produce a moral effect and a feeling of terror. But instead, this atrocity acted like a match in a powder keg, igniting nationwide clashes, strikes, and attacks on government buildings. The sheer scale of the violence got so out of hand that Gandhi actually had to temporarily call off the movement. Part 4. The Non-Cooperation Movement, Forging Hindu-Muslim Unity. Realizing that a much broader mass movement was needed, Gandhi knew he absolutely had to unite Hindus and Muslims. So he merged the push for Swaraj, or self-rule, with the Caliphate movement, which was defending the Ottoman emperor, the spiritual head of the Islamic world. In his book Hind Swaraj, Gandhi made a brilliant point. He argued that British rule only survived in India because Indians were actively cooperating with it. So his proposed non-cooperation movement was designed to unfold in very specific stages. First, surrendering British titles. Then completely boycotting civil services, the army, police, courts, government schools, and foreign goods. And finally, if the government used repression, they would escalate to full-blown civil disobedience. The economic impact of this boycott was immediate, and honestly, it was staggering. Between 1921 and 1922, the value of imported foreign cloth plummeted by nearly half. It dropped from 102 crore rupees all the way down to just 57 crore. Merchants and traders across the whole country simply refused to trade in foreign goods or even finance foreign trade. You see, foreign cloth was deeply viewed as this glaring symbol of Western economic and cultural domination. So people began discarding their imported clothes entirely, which led to these massive, very public bonfires of foreign textiles. And as a direct result, Indian textile mills and handlooms saw a massive surge in production, as everyday people committed to wearing strictly Indian-made cloth. It was a real game changer. Part 5. Differing Visions of Freedom, Refracting the Movement. Now, here is where the story gets really complicated. As the call for non-cooperation spread deep into the countryside, that singular idea of Swaraj started to fracture. Take the Awadh peasants in Uttar Pradesh, for example. They were led by a fascinating figure named Baba Ramchandra, a sannyasi who had actually been an indentured laborer in Fiji. For these heavily taxed peasants, the British weren't really the immediate enemy. The real enemy were the local talukdars and landlords. These landlords were demanding just exorbitant rents and forcing the peasants to do begar, basically unpaid labor on the landlord's farms. So for them, freedom meant fighting these local oppressors, demanding reduced revenue, and organizing strict social boycotts. I mean, they went as far as depriving landlords of basic services from barbers and washermen. What's super fascinating here is how the core message actually got twisted. As the movement spread in 1921, some peasant groups started attacking the houses of landlords, looting bazaars, and taking over green hoards. Local leaders were literally telling the peasants that Gandhi had declared no taxes were to be paid and that land was going to be redistributed. They were actively invoking Gandhi's name to justify violent actions that the official Congress leadership, of course, firmly disapproved of. Meanwhile, down in the Gudam Hills of Andhra Pradesh, tribal communities were fighting for their very survival. The colonial government had closed off large forest areas, completely cutting off the tribal's traditional livelihoods, denying them grazing rights, and forcing them into unpaid labor just to build roads. They were led by this incredibly intriguing guy named Alluri Sitaram Raju. He claimed to have astrological powers, the ability to heal people, and even said he could survive being shot by bullets. His followers literally believed he was an incarnation of God. This really highlights the stark internal contradictions of the broader movement. Think about it. In the cities, the urban middle class adhered strictly to Gandhi's nonviolent economic boycotts and peaceful resignations. But out in the forests, the Gudam Hill tribals took a completely different path. While their leader, Raju, actually praised Gandhi and encouraged his people to wear khadi cloth, he also firmly asserted that India could only be liberated by force, absolutely not by nonviolence. They actively engaged in militant guerrilla warfare and launched attacks on police stations. So as this supposedly unified movement fractured into completely contradictory visions of freedom, ranging from peaceful urban boycotts all the way to violent rural uprisings, we really have to ask ourselves, how did these messy, diverse, and totally different strands actually move the country forward? Well, it shows us that true unity almost never emerges without internal conflict. It was exactly this complex tapestry of differing aspirations, all stitched together by a shared desire to finally be free from colonial oppression, that would go on to define India's long, arduous struggle for independence. Thanks for tuning into this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the history you think you know.